So welcome to everyone this morning, and welcome to those who are joining us from different parts of the world. Before he died, towards the end of his long life, the Buddha took his disciples to a quiet place, to a lake or a pond, to give them his final instructions, rather like or comparable with the farewell discourses of Jesus that we see in the Gospel of John at the Last Supper. The Buddha, however, didn't speak. He put his hand into the mud of the lake and pulled out a lotus flower, and he just held up the lotus flower and remained silent. And the disciples were very confused about this and began to talk endlessly about what it might mean. But one disciple, Mahāsāpa, suddenly understood and smiled. And the Buddha saw him smiling. And he said, "What can be said, I have said to you. What cannot be said, I have given to Mahāsāpa." And Mahāsāpa became his successor. It was a wordless teaching. The Buddha entrusted this direct transmission outside of the scriptures and outside of his system of thought, his concepts, to Mahāsāpa. It's about direct experience rather than the insight or the experience gained through beliefs, or concepts, or philosophy. Carl Jung thought that this wordless teaching is called the flower sermon of the Buddha, that this flower sermon reminded him of the Eleusinian mysteries, which were an initiation ritual in the ancient world. And they were mysterious because we don't know what happened very much in them, except they were very powerful and influential. And we do know that at some point in the mysteries of the initiation, the officiant would hold up an ear of grain, because the mysteries were related to the fertility rituals and cycles, growth cycles. Just held up this ear of grain. Another wordless sermon. What would correspond to that in our Christian iconography or our Christian symbols? Yeah, isn't it like the elevation of the host, consecrated host at the Mass, which is a silent showing, a silent gesture. Immediately after, in the Catholic Mass, we say the acclamation of faith. And in Ireland, often there's a devotion or a devotional practice where you at the moment of elevation, the people say, "My Lord and my God." And I learned that from my mother when I was a child. But the actual moment of elevation is sacred, is silent and sacred. And I think in the discussion we had about the Last Supper and the identification of his betrayer and his showing the disciples, although they might not fully understand it at that point, but showing them that even the act of betrayal can be absorbed in the act of love, in the act of attention. And therefore, there is nothing we can do, even in our betrayal or rejection of the truth of Jesus, of God. There's nothing we can do that will not, that could permanently separate us. So, then that is how is that communicated? How is that subtle and deep and transformative message transmitted? We transmit it verbally, of course. We say, you know, God loves us, God forgives us, God will forgive us an infinite number of times. And that explanation or that transmission in a conceptual format is valuable. But does it actually change us? Does it actually enter into us, as we've been hearing, with the full force of reality, as experience did for Seamus Heaney in those poems? Do we feel that just by hearing that phrase, or that affirmation, or that conceptual idea that we are loved unconditionally, we are accepted, and in fact, does that actually do it? Or how much does it do to us? Clearly it's valuable, it's part of the transmission, but does it actually convince us? Does it actually touch us and change us? The choice of the lotus, or the choice of the bread, as a symbol of this transmission is significant. Think about it. Symbols have obvious and hidden meanings. The lotus is regarded as a very spiritual flower, a symbol of enlightenment. The way the petals open up like that, it's compared even with the highest chakra, the sort of the opening of all the petals of consciousness, all the forms of consciousness open up with this beautiful symmetry and togetherness. But the symbol, the lotus as a symbol of enlightenment is also significant because, and this is made explicit of course, that the symbol, that the lotus is plucked up from the mud of the lake. The roots of this consciousness are in the earth, or in the muddiness, the sludge of our lives. So our consciousness reaches its full enlightenment, its full opening. May you come to the fullness of being, the fullness of God Himself, St. Paul says. This is our way of describing it. That we come to this fullness of being, this opening of our whole consciousness and being in the body, in the full physicality, materiality of creation. Jewel in the lotus. So why did the Buddha's disciple, Makyasapa, why did he smile?
He understood.
He understood.
He knew.
He knew.
Is enlightened.
He was enlightened.
He had the experience.
He had the experience.
No words could express. No words could express it.
Yes. Okay. There's no words. I mean, what are the different kinds of smile you can have?
Liberation, freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Recognition.
A recognition, yes. A smile of recognition. What else? Pauline had a little enlightenment experience this morning. Tell us about it.
Happiness.
Loudly. You have to tell us loudly.
Loudly.
Your thing, your cross.
When I got up and went to get dressed and to put on my cross, I couldn't find it, and I thought it was. I was sure I must have, when I took my jumper off here yesterday, it flew back, and so I came looking for it, and it's, you know, the lost treasure in the field, and came down, couldn't find it anywhere, and then I was miserable, and at breakfast, and then I thought, well, it's lost, it's a special treasure, and I let go of that, and went upstairs, and opened up some of the books, and there it was, with the books, and it just, you know, it was the letting. I actually felt I had to let go of the disappointment and of something that was so special to me. Whether I was enlightened, I'm not sure.
But there's the smile of discovery, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the smile of finding something that you thought was lost, or seeing something that communicates itself to you just by being what it is. So that these are smile, rather like the gaze that we've been talking about, the contemplative gaze, the way we don't objectify things, but that we gaze upon them. And by gazing upon them, we love them, we become one with them. Now, in that process, when you lose something that's precious to you, and it's a horrible feeling, it's a feeling of separation, isn't it? You get separation anxiety when you lose your car keys, or your passport, or your wallet, or your something precious to you. And what happens, as Pauline was saying, that the mind begins to go into overdrive. You begin to try to remember everything that you did up to that moment, and then, you know, if people are trying to help you, it's really annoying, because they say, well, where did you last have it? If you knew where you had last had it, you wouldn't be looking for it. But they're trying to help, and you're going round and round in circles in the mind, trying to remember, trying to imagine, trying to anticipate. And maybe if you're a certain kind of imagination, you may think, if I could really strongly imagine that I was finding it and holding it, then that would happen. You know, well, Jesus says, if you really believe it, it will happen. You know, so the mind becomes very complicated and very active, conceptually, imaginatively, emotionally, when you're looking for something that you've lost. And yet, when you find it, if you find it, there is just this simple, joyful feeling of rightness. It's a smile. I get it. I've got it. Or as Makia Sapa would have said, I get it. I get what this flower sermon is telling me. So what is the message of the flower sermon? It just holds up a flower.
No mud, no lotus. No mud, no lotus.
No mud, no lotus. Okay.
Yeah.
No mud, no lotus, no problem.
Simplicity.
Simplicity. It's what the Zen school calls isness, or suchness. That actually what you're looking for is. It's not there or even here, it just is. So the duality of the mind, which creates all our complexities, and it also enables us to discover penicillin and send spaceships to Mars, but the complexity, the dualistic digital operation of the mind separates us from this experience of isness. What actually can prepare us for that, if you think again of what happens when you lose something, or you're conscious that you're looking for something that you think you don't have, and you would say, well, of course I don't have it, because that's why I'm looking for it. But in this experience of loss, an essential element in the process of resolving it, it's rather like betrayal, is that you accept the loss. So Jesus accepted the betrayal and neutralizes the betrayal, because if you don't allow yourself to be betrayed, you're not betrayed. It's easier said than done in some circumstances, but that's the work, in one sense, you call it the work of forgiveness. So even when you lose something, some object, and it upsets you, you feel you're losing something with so many good memories, and something that somebody gave you, and it's your connection with that person. So all of these complicated, very understandable human reactions to loss can be resolved or called for renunciation. You then have to say, well, as the Irish would say, may all bad luck go with it. It's a letting go of what you think you have lost. And in that letting go, you actually find something. If you're lucky, you find the medal that you've lost, or your passport. But that isn't, that's incidental, accidental in a way. But in the renunciation of what you feel you have lost, you actually overcome the loss. You let go of that painful experience of separation and of loss, and you find something. Rather, as in the parables of the lost sheep, or the lost coin, or the prodigal son, in each of these stories, Jesus plays on this theme of losing and finding, of letting go and recovering. You should just remember in the story of the prodigal son, which is, like all the parables, a key to the teaching of Jesus, and therefore a key to understanding the meaning of Holy Week. The father was very compliant with his son. He may have felt the son was betraying him or rejecting him, coming and saying, "Give me my money, I'm going to go off and have a good time, and goodbye." Well, many parents might feel that. And if God had these kind of human feelings, then God would no doubt feel that. So, but what we see in the story is that the father doesn't resist. So, although he is rejected by his younger son, he doesn't get stuck in the sensation, or we might even say the appearance of rejection. Because is the young son actually betraying him, rejecting him, or is he just clouded? His mind is clouded by his ego, his desire, his fantasy. He's in a deluded state. Does he know what he's doing? That was the question that Isaac asked, which I didn't, or the answer he gave, which I didn't get the meaning of yesterday. You know, why, we asked why. Why did this happen? Why did you do this? So what we can see, I think, here is something of the difference between direct transmission and a conceptualization of what is happening. In other words, experiencing it directly or thinking about it. And as long as we're thinking about it, we are going to be in a confused and complicated state of mind and feeling. But in the experience of the direct transmission, in the direct experience, there is this wonderful smile of simplicity. We get it. So we find it and we get it. I think, again, this is something we can understand. Is it worthwhile trying to understand? Yes, I think it is. We may get more complicated trying to understand it, but it's not that complicated in itself. Not easy, but it's simple. And it can help us to enter into this experience of direct transmission. This is what really the whole of the Gospel is about, the direct transmission of what Jesus is passing to us. What does he pass to us in the Last Supper, the bread? What does he tell us at the Last Supper that he's doing? I have shared with you everything I have learned from my Father. I call you servants no longer, I call you friends, because I am sharing with you everything. That's a remarkable statement, because if you share everything you have, there is no difference of status between you and your student. That's why teachers like to keep something back sometimes. I think there was some school somewhere in Asia, I forget where it was, where how true it was, but that the succession of teachers in some particular temple used to keep something back from their disciple, because they didn't want the disciples to know as much as they did. Which means, of course, over the generations, less and less gets transmitted. And you end up transmitting nothing. Or just transmitting some shell or some hollow teaching. So, but Jesus is doing something quite different from that. And it is the mark of a true teacher, and we see this in the Buddha, we see this in Jesus, that they desire to transmit what they know, everything that they know. This is, you know, the academic world is when it works at its best, this is what it does. It becomes a conduit of a flowing of knowledge and wisdom, experience, research. But the academic world can also become a very petty, possessive, egocentric world, where actually transmission of knowledge becomes highly politicized and competitive. So, but what we see in the Last Supper is Jesus telling us that he wants to empower us with everything that he knows, and as he knows himself, and that clearly is the basis of his authority, as we'll see in a moment. He is sharing himself. And there's a little distinction here between what the Buddha is doing and what Jesus is doing. And that perhaps explains why, one of the reasons why Jesus lifts up the bread, shares the bread, gives the bread, and identifies himself with the bread, so it becomes this sacrament or this living symbol of what he is transmitting. So one further way we might understand this is to come back to this idea of the gaze and the looking at, the objectification of something that we're looking at, compared with the contemplative gaze, by which we see rather than look. We see the true meaning, the true isness of the person or the thing that we are contemplating. Contemplation is the simple enjoyment of the truth. Kind of a Zen-like saying, actually, by Aquinas. Contemplation is the simple enjoyment of the truth. And the enjoyment is the key word here. This is where the smile is. The smile is in that experience of the joy of being. And when you touch the joyful being of something or someone that you are contemplating, you have touched the truth of that thing or that person, and that evokes joy, the experience of enjoyment. So, and then think again of how we approach meditation. Do we approach meditation in this contemplative way, this gazing way, or do we approach meditation merely as a means, technique for acquiring something? Now, the mind is capable of starting in one place and ending in another, so we may end up, or we may start meditation in this more objectified and basically egocentric way or motivation, and we end up actually in contemplation, opening ourselves to the grace of the direct transmission. So that's probably how we all start. This is why we need a teacher like Jesus to show us how to take these steps, these necessary steps, to get there. In modern thinking, including feminism and some theories of knowledge and perception, the gaze, the word gaze, has acquired something of a negative overtone, in fact, particularly in some feminist thinking. The gaze usually refers to the male gaze. Okay. This is a cultural thing. That the men look at the woman. Men look at women, and women watch themselves being looked at. And I mean, this is a feminist interpretation. I'm not just using it as an example. We don't have to argue about it. But related to that, culturally or psychologically, perhaps, is the fact you were saying, well, wouldn't this apply for men too? And actually, it doesn't. If you think about it, men don't like being looked at in the same way. They become quite uncomfortable. Well, sometimes. And we don't have to spend too much time. You can think about that. Talk about that over lunch. But anyway, this is the theory that you know, our culture is weighed in on this male gaze. And the idea here is that the gaze is really a staring at, rather than the contemplative gaze that I was talking about. And in this, experience of knowing that we are being looked at, we become self-conscious. We become conscious that we're being observed. And, well, and we all live, men and women, in a highly observed urban environment now. Even here on Bere Island, thank God they didn't do it, but because some of the islanders were not doing the sorting, what do you call it, the ecological sorting?
Recycling.
The recycling. They weren't doing the recycling properly, or washing the food cans before they put them away, or, you know, dumping the wrong things in the wrong basket. There was a proposal to set up a CCTV camera, which fortunately was not. Probably being a small community, they discovered they knew who was doing it anyway. So, and that probably does make a difference to the way we unconsciously feel when you know that you're being filmed, photographed, watched, observed, and at any moment, you know, somebody could replay these tapes. Anyway, so that's maybe a rather negative understanding of the gaze. I don't know whether that actually makes, if that is true about the difference between men and women, it might say something about why more women feel comfortable with meditation at first than men. But I'm not sure. But in the spiritual tradition, the gaze is quite different. You're not being objectified, you're not being secretly watched and undressed, or you are in spiritual language. The gaze is a non-threatening, non-objectifying act of loving attention. And this act of loving attention brings the insight, the wisdom. This is in the case of Jesus, or any teacher in different degrees. It brings this insight, the wisdom of the teacher, into the consciousness of the disciple. So the gaze is not looking at and judging, but the gaze is actually an opening up of a pathway of communication, or of communion, in fact. And that's why we speak about the sharing of the bread as a communion. We have, and for example, in the Catholic devotion or tradition of adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, there is I think, an insight into this, appreciation of this, that you are actually in the presence. Not so much, you may be looking at the host, consecrated host in the monstrance on the altar, or sitting in front of the tabernacle. So that it can be a focus of your attention. But it should be a focus, not a fixation of your attention. And I think if that devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, say in the Catholic tradition, if that is truly prayer, then it will lead you to an experience of the real presence of Christ within you, within your heart. So it's not an externalization or objectification of Christ, as sometimes it can be described, as if that's where Jesus is in the tabernacle. But it's actually, in Catholic thought and theology, yes, we can say the real presence is there. But no less is he present in the eye of the beholder, or in the heart of the of the beholder. And I think that's the meaning of the Eucharist, really, and why the theology of the Eucharist, which we will be celebrating tomorrow at the Mass of the Lord's Supper tomorrow evening, the theology of the Eucharist is the understanding of meditation, of Christian meditation. It's the theology of real presence. And in this contemplative gaze, we are not being gazed at or looked at, and nor are we looking at, objectifying what we are looking at. But there is a flow, it's a two-way communion. It's more even deeper than a communication. It is actually a communion. And that's also something prepares us to begin to understand the meaning of the resurrection and the relationship that Jesus has with us and with the world, with humanity, with the cosmos, after he has risen from the world of duality and forms. That world of perception that we call the world of duality, this or that, he had already warned us that that is not how we can best understand or experience the kingdom of God. The experience of God, the presence, the real presence. You cannot say, look, here it is or there it is, he said, because it is within you. But the word he uses that we translate as within can equally well be translated as among. So some translations, the kingdom of heaven is within you, so you might say that's what the meditator would say. Or the kingdom of heaven is in your midst, so that's what the social activist would say. But actually it's the same word. And it is rather like light, it's both particle and, what's the other one? Wave. It's, it takes us into the paradox of a union of opposites, or a transcendence of duality. And that might sound a bit sophisticated or highfalutin. It really means simplicity. That's the meaning of simplicity. So, and I think our meditation brings us into this path, into this process of the gaze, which involves the transcendence of our self-consciousness. We begin this as soon as we sit down to meditate by the very simple mechanism or act of taking the attention off ourselves. That's what triggers the whole process, or leaving self behind. And whether or not any of this context, any of these this religious or spiritual or theological or faith context, whether that is or is not present, I mean personally I think it's very helpful if it's present. If this faith context is created and transmitted and described in a helpful contemporary way, I think it makes it a great deal easier to start the journey of meditation and to keep it going day by day. But even if you didn't, you could still start. It is as simple as it sounds. You can sit and begin to say the mantra and to take the attention off yourself and to lay thoughts aside. You begin where you are. And that's also part of the meaning of the flower or the host, or the bread. It is, this is it. And Jesus says, you know, now is the day of salvation. The time has come, he said. That's the beginning of his teaching after the 40 days in the desert. This is his first words are, the time has come. Now is the day of salvation. The kingdom of heaven is upon you. is here, present, pressing upon you. So we can begin where we are. That's the essence of the contemplative journey, and it's the heart of the gospel, and indeed of all spiritual teaching. So, as it were, the first step we take is also the same step that we keep repeating, and it will be the goal at the end, if there is an end, of going beyond our self-consciousness, our self-fixation. Or we might say, allowing the ego, which is the state of self-reflection, to find its proper, modest, functional place within our lives and within our consciousness. So the ego is not destroyed, otherwise we'd be all walking around like zombies, or very inadequate and insecure people, or very manic and deluded people. So we need a healthy ego, but the ego does quite seriously need to be put in its place, needs to be trained or tamed. And if it's not trained or tamed, you will end up with a monster. Maybe a monster that is screaming in pain, but nevertheless potentially a monster. So when we begin this process, even psychologically, it's necessary for our human development to be able to take the attention of ourselves and pay attention to others. Anyway, this is why I think St. Anthony of the Desert says the monk who knows that he is praying is not truly praying. The monk who does not know that he is praying is truly praying. I think this is something we put into practice if we approach meditation and practice it in this tradition. And it kind of echoes or reminds one of that passage in First Letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, after the great hymn of love. He says, "Now we see only a reflection in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am known." That's the crucial phrase, even as I am known. So I will know as fully as I am known, and I will know fully because I am fully known. And this is the gaze, this is communion, this is the union that we are invited into by Jesus. And that is a goal, that is actually something we are moving towards at some point in our journey of existence, wherever it may be. The sooner we start, the better, and we come closer and closer to it. Until then, and on the way, we see only a reflection in a mirror. So we form ideas about all of this. We live in this world of concepts and the feelings associated with the concepts. We become attached to our own concepts, to our own brands, to our own ideologies. Interesting that one of the first things the Pope said, Pope Francis, the three temptations of the Church, the first of them was to treat the gospel as if it were an ideology. In other words, to turn it into concepts. As soon as you've got the concepts, you then defend the concepts, and you, of course, put the concepts in the tabernacle, as it were, and you have created rules to protect the concepts. So the first temptation and the greatest treason, the greatest betrayal, really, of the direct transmission that Jesus is about and what he's doing is to, as it were, freeze the transmission. I mean, this webcast is going out as a transmission. Sometimes, I hope this isn't happening to any of you at home watching it, but sometimes, like on a Skype call, the picture freezes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And what do you do then, when the picture freezes? What's your feeling when the picture freezes?
Anger.
Hmm?
Anger.
You're so angry. No, it's true. I think you do. You feel frustrated, angry. Yeah.
Frustration.
And then, what do? You feel.
Swear.
You swear. In Italian, it's even worse.
It's very interesting because it gives you the message your internet connection is probably low. So your Wi-Fi connection with God is quite low. That's what the computer says.
Okay, yes, the computer says there's a reason for this. You should subscribe to a higher bandwidth. Anyway, so yes, you feel frustrated and angry, and you realize that the transmission has stopped.
Try to fix it.
You try to fix it, and probably the best thing to do is disconnect,
Switch it off.
switch it off, and start again. Yeah. Go back to the beginning, pick it up again. So, anyway, the conceptualization of the transmission that Jesus is making to us turns what he is doing, the experience that he is giving or sharing or inviting us into, it turns that into merely an explanation, a description, or a mental act of objectifying something. And then I think this explains why you have people sometimes who go to the Bible as if it contains the answers, to specific answers to any specific problem in life, and doesn't, and they will sort of quote or misquote or twist the words of Scripture or be highly selective about them in order to prove actually what they have already made up their minds about. That kind of fundamentalist reading of Scripture is not about encountering the Word, which has this mystery of the living transmission that happens when you read the Scriptures in the right way, or you're open to the Scriptures. But you go to the Scriptures as if it were a toolbox, and you find the right verse to fit your own preconception, whatever it is, or to support your prejudice, or to support your ideological position, or whatever it is. Now, it's not that concepts, thinking is not important. That's what we're doing now. But I think our capacity to think, our capacity to conceptualize, to compare, to test intellectually, it's a tool. But it's a tool to be left behind at a certain point of understanding. And the great mystical wisdom is, of course, universal, that at a certain point in the process, we let go of thought. We lay it aside. And in practical terms, we return, after the work of meditation, we return to thinking and imagination with this tool cleaned and refreshed. It's like looking after your tools. And the meditation helps you to do that. And I was just thinking, just we're finished now, but I was just thinking of how often in the New Testament Jesus is shown in this act of gazing. And there are there are times where he gazes, as it were, into someone. The rich young man, after the rich young man had finally got into a place where he could be open to Jesus and had got over his ego up to a point, Jesus then looks at him and loves him. Or on other occasions, Jesus looks up to heaven and gives thanks, or looks up to heaven, sighs deeply, and then performs a healing or a miracle. So it's interesting when as you read the scriptures, just keep the New Testament, just keep that in mind and see how often Jesus is shown teaching or healing, and it's connected to this contemplative gaze that he lives in. Really, you could say he lives in this contemplative gaze, and then he takes his specific times for meditation, as we have to do. He goes away to a lonely place to pray alone, usually alone with his disciples. So he needs these specific times of withdrawal, just as we need our specific times of meditation. But the goal of that, or the result of that, is that we are able to live a daily life in this contemplative way. Jesus knows the hearts of men. It says in the Gospel of John, he never needed evidence about anyone because he could tell what someone had within them. So his gaze is quite clearly not an objectification or a judgment, but it is an insight. And what he sees in us, even if it's not very nice, he sees that he's going to be betrayed by Judas and by Peter and the rest. But even when he sees this in others or in another, it doesn't lead him to reject, to condemn, to punish, to make us feel bad about ourselves. Quite the reverse. The gaze itself brings us to an awareness. After all, Jesus told Peter, he prepared Peter for his betrayal. He told Judas that he knew what he was going to do. Now, even if the penny doesn't drop, as it clearly didn't for them, nevertheless, the experience of being known fully, that St. Paul is talking about, then I will know fully even as I am fully known. But that experience of being fully known, even if we don't fully know it yet, fully understand it, the fact that we are the recipients of this loving, non-judgmental, healing gaze and acceptance is, of course, transformative. It takes us time to get it, but it's there. We find it. We think we've lost it. Actually, we haven't. It's there within us, the indwelling of the Spirit. But we look for it, and eventually we get it. And clearly, this direct transmission that Jesus is performing in the Last Supper and throughout the whole of these next passages in his Passion, the direct transmission that is taking place, that the words and the images of Scripture are lightly, amazingly communicating, this direct transmission can only come from direct perception. If he didn't know it, if he didn't fully know that he was fully known, then he wouldn't be able to have made this direct transmission. We'll just end with bringing this back to our meditation. There's a chapter in Door to Silence called Being Present Now by John Main. I'll let it speak for itself, just a few of these short paragraphs. To understand what this oneness I'm speaking of really means, you have to appreciate that the essence of meditation is not thinking, but presence. To understand what this oneness I'm speaking of really means, you have to appreciate that the essence of meditation is not thinking, but presence. We learn to be wholly present in the moment that we are now. So much of our time we spend thinking what we will do in the future or about what we have done in the past. Most of the time our minds are wholly distracted with memories, daydreams and plans. By meditating we can learn to become wholly inserted into the now of the present moment. We learn this in the tradition that I have been describing by saying our word, our meditation word, our mantra with pure attention. Learn to say the mantra from the beginning of your meditation until the end, by returning to it whenever you are distracted and slip out of the present into past, future or fantasy. Whatever thoughts come to you, however brilliant, whatever idea, however original, let them go. Don't hang on to anything, but listen to the sound of your mantra. This leads to an open attention, a deep attention of spirit. It is a mindfulness of what is, not what has been or not what might be, but what is. The first step, and in a sense the only step, is therefore mindfulness, attention. We'll look later at what he calls to be the second step, which he says is the second degree of the first step. Just taking that same first simple step of attention, saying of the mantra, understanding where that is leading us.